This is a report on interest rate forecast and the yield curve during the week of October 27th to October 31st, 2014. I am Sajan.
And I'm Rohan. During the week of October 27th till 31st, the Fed finally announced the end of third round of quantitative easing. Although they stated that they will maintain the Fed funds rate low for a considerable amount of time, overall the yields increased throughout the board during the week. The short-term rates increased more than the long-term rates, which led to the flattening of the yield curve, which you can see from this point onwards till this point till this point on. The prospect of low inflation may have contributed to the flattening of the yield curve as well, which is one of the possibilities of why the yield curve has been flattening. And also, the key events during that week was continued fall in the oil prices. The Fed announced the end of the quantitative easing, as I already told you. There was an increase in GDP in the third quarter, and the Bank of Japan introduced quantitative easing to their system as well. And when it was the end of the quantitative easing part 3 on October 29th, that was on Wednesday, the Fed announced the Fed stated that the market was ready to cope with interest rate spikes and vowed to maintain the federal fund rates between 0 till 0.25% for a considerable amount of time. The length of the time would depend on how the economy progressed and would lengthen or shorten depending on the direction the economic indicators headed. As a result of all this, yields through medium-term securities rose as much as 4.5 basis points, while the long-term yields declined slightly, which again flattened the yield curve in the process, which you can also see in the figure from here to here. And to explain to you about this more, I'd like to call Sajan on this part of the.
All right. Moving on to the away from the action day on Wednesday to Thursday. As compared to Wednesday, the yield curve on Thursday, both the yield curves on Wednesday and Thursday were virtually identical, as can be observed in the figure. They actually overlap one another. However, there was a key announcement made on Thursday by the Bureau of Economic Analysis, as they announced a 3.5% GDP growth during the third quarter, which far exceeded the expectations. As a result, we can see that the yield curve has steepened on Friday as compared to Thursday. While the Fed finally ended QE on our end, moving on to Friday, on the Central Bank of Japan actually introduced theirs on the other end. As a result, the dollar surged to its highest level in 6 years, with U.S. securities becoming more desirable for Japanese investors. This should push up U.S. security prices, which should ultimately lead to decrease in rates, which is not observed right here at this moment. However, it is scheduled to take place in the longer run. Overall, to review the week as a whole, we can see that the yield curve or the yields actually rose across the board. However, it flattened as yields on the short end actually rose more than the yields on the longer end, causing the yield curve to flatten, as can be observed in the figure. As far as the rise in the yields can be contributed to the end of quantitative easing, the third round of quantitative easing by the Fed, along with the GDP growth numbers published on Thursday, which may have contributed to the rise in yields all across the board. As far as the flattening movement of the yield curve, could be due to an expectation of low inflation, which can be highlighted by falling oil prices, which are scheduled to continue to fall in the near future. That, along with the Fed's persistence to keep a grip on the Fed funds rate between 0 to a quarter%, may have also led to the flattening of the yield curve. Um, Moving on, here we look at the 1-year rate forecast. And if you notice, the 1-year Treasury rate forecast actually mimics the movement of the yield curve. So as you can see, as the yield curve steepens, the forecast spike up, and as they flatten during different intervals, they actually follow the same path. Um, and as the Treasury forecast is actually a function of the yields in the yield curve, it's not surprising that they do mimic each other, or the forecast mimics the yield curve. Um, Also, there may, as it's obvious, like one of the slumps here on the 10-year mark, which can be seen as a slight slump here at the yield curve as well, is due to the government subsidizing the 10-year um, rate, due to the importance it has on the housing market, as it is a benchmark upon which mortgages for housing industry is based upon, and as housing industry is one of the most important industries to get economic spending going on and to keep confidence or maintain confidence for people to go out and buy houses. It's reflected upon the forecast and the yield curve as well that the housing prices here are artificially low. And as far as the volatility of the yield curve itself, I mean, the Treasury forecast itself is due to the volatility or constant steepening and flattening movement along the yield curve itself. With that being said, that concludes our report on both the yield curve and the Treasury forecast for the week of October 27th to 31st. And thank you for your time.
Thank you.